This is about defending democracy. This is no longer Democrats versus Republicans. What do you want your kids to believe in? There must be give and take.
This is White Flag with Joe Walsh.
Good friend of mine. I thank God almost every week that I got to know Fred Guttenberg these last 5 or so years that have been an absolutely crazy political time for me. His beautiful, lovely, gorgeous daughter, Jaime, was shot and killed in Parkland, Florida. Gosh, Fred, 5 years ago now.
Yeah.
And he has become, in my mind, one of the nation's most genuine, committed, impassioned activists. You know what the deal is: guns, gun-related, mass shootings, everything. Fred and I disagree on a lot when it comes to guns, but every time the country goes through this, I want to talk to my good friend, even if we do disagree about shit. Fred, brother, welcome.
What's going on, Joe?
Hey, I don't know where you were. I want you to tell me where you were when you heard about Nashville and what goes through your damn mind when this happens.
Where was I? I was on vacation.
On vacation.
So my wife and I, my wife is always telling me that we can't get away, that we can't take a true mental health break because of what happened to us. It's not just that our daughter was killed and my son experienced it. It's that we've invested ourselves in doing something about it, but we both needed a break. We were both mentally and emotionally drained, and we decided we were going to shut down. I even went on Twitter about almost 2 weeks ago and put out a message saying, I'm off Twitter for 2 weeks. I'm taking a mental health break.
Yeah.
And then 2 things happened. The first week was all the nonsense in Florida where this happens to be when they last minute decided to throw on the schedule permitless carry, which pulled me out of my break. And then the second thing was the Nashville shooting. There was no mental health break, which I still need. And
is it, Fred, is it literally like PTSD when there's a shooting at a school and children die? Do you immediately go back?
It fucking
Jaime?
Breaks me. No, it brings me. You know what? This year was 5 years, and I remember saying on the day of 5 years, it still feels like 5 minutes. These things they pull you right back in. There are the photos of that scene of people running and crying and people jumping in to help. It's seared in my head. I remember it like yesterday, and it is one of those things where the next one is predictable. We know it's going to happen, but it's also preventable. And it's why, Joe, it's why you've become important to me, because we are 2 guys from a different perspective.
Yes.
You're a gun guy. You talk about it all the time. I think you're wrong on a lot of stuff, but we talk about it all the time. I'm not an anti-gun guy. And that's the thing people need to understand. I'm not anti-gun, I'm anti-gun violence. But the gun guys who are currently elected act like I'm an anti-gun guy. And they act like any effort to do anything meaningful is an affront to people like you, gun guys.
Well, we fight and we debate and we argue about what is meaningful. And that's where you said something, Fred, a minute ago. You said Nashville, this kind of thing is preventable. Love you, brother, but bullshit. We can't, and maybe I'm misreading you. There's no way we can ever completely stop mass shootings in this country. You agree with that, right?
I do. And and I'm glad you called me out. We're never going to, there was a time when it was. We've gone too far from that time. You know, listen, you and the other gun guys have always said over the past, call it 30 years, we don't need more gun laws. And yet, while passing gun laws all across the country, except the problem is the gun laws you were passing made this more likely. They brought us to the place where we are today because they made it easier.
Like
They
how?
made What's that?
Like how? What do you
Well,
mean?
for example, Jaime was born in 2000. The assault weapons ban ended in 2004. Let me finish. Just hear me out. At the time, 1.2% of all guns sold in 2004. When Jaime was killed in 2018, it was over 20% of all weapons sold, and it's now 25%.
Wait. Over what? You're talking about AR-15s? What are you talking
AR-15s.
Okay.
Now, just over 25% of all weapons sold. Now, listen, a ban is a whole other conversation. But while flooding the marketplace, which, by the way, was an intentional business decision after the Heller ruling, because the Heller defined common use, and the industry went out and put these things, made sure they would turn into a common use weapon. They did nothing. This is not about an argument for a ban. This is an argument against flooding our streets, marketing to children while saying it was a sport weapon, and doing nothing to ensure the safety of those who will inevitably be impacted by that jump over a short period of time from about 1% of sales to 25% of sales. And I'll give you another example because they're on the wrong path again. But by the way, okay, along the way, okay, they've got laws that were passed. You look across the states, stand your ground, permitless carry, open carry. These are gun laws. They are gun laws that are getting passed.
Right.
But they're making us less safe.
Well, but back up.
The numbers don't lie, Joe. The numbers don't lie.
Well, I know the numbers don't lie, and you and I won't debate the assault weapon ban, but the assault weapon ban had zero impact on anything. But
That's wrong.
Well, you and I.
The numbers don't lie.
You though, my brother. You do get that we could ban and get rid of and do whatever, but because there are so many guns out there, we can never prevent completely mass shootings.
We can mitigate.
We can mitigate. We can minimize.
And you know what? Listen, you've heard me talk about this before. My goal is we're not going to stop it. I have three goals. I want to reduce the gun violence death rate. We can do that. I want to reduce the instances of gun violence. We can do that. And I want to reduce the severity of gun violence injuries when gun violence happens. We can do that. Okay. Those are achievable goals. Stopping it, sadly, we are in a place now because of too many who lied to this country over too many years about what the Second Amendment was, about what gun violence stopped, about what the impact of guns is on society. We've listened to the wrong people for too many years who had no consideration for the concerns of safety when doing this. And here we are today where we can't stop it. We can only mitigate.
Sometimes you just freaking infuriate me. We won't debate the Second Amendment right now. You and I disagree on that. These aren't preventable.
I don't think we do. I think we agree on what the Second Amendment says. I disagree with the people who have bastardized what it says and what it means.
Well, okay, is that me? I mean, I believe, and again, this is a 6-hour conversation. I believe the Second Amendment gives me a right to keep and bear arms to defend myself, my property, and my family. Do you agree with that?
I do.
Okay.
Do you agree it's an unlimited right that anybody who we know is a threat to themselves or someone else should have unfettered access?
No right is unlimited. Not even free speech.
Then we agree.
No right.
Then we agree.
Right, but you and I would draw the line different at where we regulate and or restrict that.
Listen,
right.
I would argue whether you're part of an active militia, but that's another conversation.
Go back.
So anyway, we could go 8 hours on that. You're right.
All right. Answer me this, Fred, because this is where my anger is, and I think you'll get angry at me. We can't prevent them. We can try to minimize and mitigate. In the meantime, isn't it all of the above? I.e., Oh, I know you're going to throw something at me. In the meantime, I want to do whatever we can to protect our school children. If I've got teachers or administrators or adults in school buildings who are properly trained and know how to use a firearm, damn it, throw it in there. I want them to be armed to help, just as another tool to help protect. I don't want to force any teacher to get trained and armed, but if there are trained and armed adults in the school building, I think that is a tool. Do you oppose that tool?
Trained and armed teachers?
Trained and armed adults, teachers, coaches, administrators in the buildings.
If you say it this way, trained and armed security, whose sole focus is security, you won't get an argument. When you go to teachers, you will. Let me ask you a question. Do you know how many schools there are in the country?
No. Thousands and thousands.
115,000.
Okay.
Do you know how many schools have actually had a school shooting since Columbine?
Well, not many. I mean, it's still a fairly rare thing.
Do you know how many? Approximately. Take a guess. Out of the 115,000 schools. Since
Columbine?
Yeah.
I'll say, you're going to make me look silly. I'll say 172.
You're not far off. It's 376. Okay. And so it's a minute, tiny little. My daughter got caught up in an almost impossible reality when you look at the statistic. And I bring it up because here's the thing. Arming teachers, and I'll say one more thing. I've seen the videos and the photos of what happens once the bullets from the AR-15 start. Okay? The blackout smoke conditions, people start running. It is, Joe, kids running for safety over my daughter after she was armed. Mm-hmm. Okay? I've seen it all. And you add teachers whose sole focus should be getting kids into a safe place, into that armed mix, shooting into a crowd where they can't see. They cannot see. Okay? It becomes a more deadly mix to solve a problem that affects, okay, a minute little detail. No, the bigger the issue of gun violence is far bigger than that. And I will tell you something. Okay, every school, every day, I'm going to give you my biggest fear in life, has thousands of kids who walk onto and off a campus every day. My son used to wait for his sister to walk her to the car in a line with all these other kids. Okay, all that hardening schools does is move the shooter. That's all that it does. And if the shooter was outside that hardened environment, he would have shot into that line, and I could have lost both my kids. Okay.
You make a very good point, Fred, in that school shootings, even though when they happen, like when a plane crash happens, we say, oh my God, plane crashes, commercial airline crashes in this country, in the world are extremely rare. School shootings are extremely rare. I get that. I know that. I agree with you. My point is, a school shooting happens at a school. If I've got armed and trained teachers voluntarily who are trained and armed, I'd rather have armed and trained adults in that building. I mean, the cops in Nashville, Fred, they got there in 14
So let me
minutes.
ask you another question. There are schools that have armed teachers. Okay. And the only data that I have is through 2020. Do you know how many of those schools have had incidents because of armed teachers?
Maybe never.
No. Over 100. Okay. Because of the armed teachers. People leaving the gun out. Okay. A gun being pulled in the wrong moment. No, listen, what you're doing, okay, for this minuscule percentage of a problem, because of the refusal to deal with the reality that we have a gun violence issue that doesn't only affect schools, you're introducing more guns into an environment that will guarantee more gun violence in schools. You will see more kids die in schools if we arm teachers than you currently have. You just won't read about it because it won't be in a mass environment.
Look, to me, Fred, it's not an either or. It is a tool until we can minimize.
Trained armed security. We'll agree on that. Not teachers. Teachers have a different role.
They're adults. And again, Fred, I'm not forcing anybody. I don't want to force anybody to be trained in arms. But if you have coaches or administrators who are trained in arms, why not? Why not extra additional security? And I'm not asking to replace anything.
I can't remember where in Texas, like 2 years ago, there was a shooting. A lot of people were killed in it, in a Walmart. There were trained, armed customers in the Walmart. And do you know what they ended up doing? On the ground, helping people and not confronting the shooter. There were trained, armed people who walked into Uvalde. I'm sorry, Joe, when it starts, okay, I don't want teachers, I want them to deal with the children. Where you will never, ever, ever get me to agree with you on.
See, this is interesting, Fred. Get out of a school for a moment. If I'm in a movie theater and a mass shooter walks into a movie theater, I'd feel better if I knew there were a few armed, trained dudes in that movie theater than not. I mean, you wouldn't?
I would feel better if we never listened to the people who said over the past 30 years, the solution to everything is to arm more and sell more. Listen, America wasn't this way. It wasn't this way. The majority of America's history was as a country that actually introduced measures to reduce gun violence, as a gun safety country. This is a new phenomenon. And when I say new, I mean like 25, 30 years old. But this country has a long history.
Fred, you're right, actually. You're right. And this is an interesting point. We've always had guns. We've always had a lot of guns. You and I grew up, our parents grew up in a time where people, kids, high school kids drove to school in their pickups with their shotguns in the back of their pickups. I mean, we've always had this. Guns are an issue, but something else has changed as well, Fred.
The number of guns.
Well,
the way they're marketed, who they're sold to.
But not just the number of guns. Something else has changed. You'd acknowledge that, right? In fact, there was a time when guns were more present, even among young people. But something has changed in the culture as well. You'd acknowledge.
Listen, we've made it easier for those who are a threat to themselves or others to get access to guns. Listen, I know where you're going because you're going to the mental health part of this.
No. It's just part of it.
And the truth is, it's a big, huge part of it because it used to be 2/3 of all gun violence. It's actually just over a half now of all gun violence is suicide. So it's a huge part of it. And listen, in the legislation that was signed by President Biden back in July, there's money and tools for mental health. It's a huge part of it. However, the United States doesn't live in a vacuum. Okay, other countries have the mental health issue without the gun violence problem. Listen. You are no longer a fan of his.
Who?
But the former president. Do you remember what one of the very first things that he did was when he was elected?
No. Well, yeah, but no. What?
He removed restrictions and made it easier for those with mental health issues and who were deemed threats to actually be able to access firearms. He deemed gun stores essential when everything else was shut down during COVID, which is why we saw the surge from about 300 million to 400 million weapons in this country. Okay? You can argue with me all day long. The reality is, when Jaime was killed in 2018, there were 300 million weapons. We now have over 400 million, plus ghost guns, okay? The reality is, those numbers of weapons play a factor in a country where other issues exist, and we've done nothing to keep them out of the hands of those intent harm.
Here's the problem I have with that. We have 400 million guns. When you look at the homicide rate and the suicide rate going back since like 1968, according to the FBI's stats, the homicide rate and the suicide rate in this country since 68 really hasn't budged. It's gone up the last few years, like 3 to 4 to 5 years. But generally from 68 until now, both the suicide and homicide rate are kind of a straight line. We had
homicide rate is actually going up. That's the suicide rate as a percentage of gun violence has come down. The homicide rate is going up.
Only in the last few years. When you go back, Fred, to 68, it's basically almost a straight line. We had 130 million guns back in 68.
What happened in the last few years?
Hold on. Broader point before the last few years, we had 120 some million guns in 1968. We have 400 million guns now, and the homicide and suicide rate really hasn't changed that much. Yes, there are too many guns, but it's something else has changed, Fred. That's all I'm saying. The homicide rate in 68 was as high as it is now.
So you want to know what else has changed?
What?
Your side has passed a lot of laws. Things like stand your ground, things like permitless carry, things like open carry. Okay. And by the way, where the homicide rate and suicide rate is spiking is in the states where these laws have been passed.
Not fair.
What's it?
Not fair.
That's 100% fair.
Because in these states, it's like Fred, the crime rate, red states. Look, these red states have blue cities. I mean, this is
no. You can look
Mississippi, Missouri.
You look at rural areas. Okay, the homicide rate and suicide rate is spiking even faster than in the cities. Okay, and that's a fact. I am so glad that my book is coming out next month. I hope.
Cool.
Actually, you're mentioned in it. You're even mentioned in it, just so you know. But American Carnage is coming out. All the data is there. All of it is sourced.
I will fight you in that. Yes, the homicide rate is up in rural America. It's up in urban America as well. It's up. You look at a state like Missouri. If you got rid of St. Louis and Kansas City, Missouri has like one of the highest homicide rates in the country. Get rid of St. Louis and Missouri, it's like in the middle of the pack.
The total number of comes down, but the percentage in those rural areas. Okay, you have fewer people. Okay, there's fewer people, but they're no less violent.
My overall point is we have a shitload of guns in this country, 400 some million.
Let's end the conversation there. We agree. It's too many.
No, we do. Well, hold on. And we're going to get to that because that's what's interesting. We didn't have 400 million guns back in 68. The homicide rate and suicide rate is basically unchanged. Something else is going on. But then, Fred, okay, we have like Ted Cruz is a pussy and he doesn't answer the question. This is a uniquely American problem. We have a shitload of guns. We have a gun culture, which is good and bad. And we do a lousy job, as you and I have talked about, trying to keep guns out of the hands of bad guys. But we're not getting rid of the 400 million guns, my friend. And there'll be more than 400 million guns next year. So with that as a given, what do we do?
Well,
that's not changing.
You've probably heard me say this before. I think ammunition is the holy grail to solving this. And I am a big believer in extending background checks to ammunition, and here's why. Because of the 400 million plus, okay, ghost guns and other, causes that'll cause it to go up, you have a lot of prohibited users, purchasers of guns. Okay, they get them through gun shows or other means, or now in states that don't even require background checks, in all circumstances, like Florida, once the governor signs the new law.
Hey, Fred, can you back up for a moment? You said something that pissed me off. Do you oppose the notion of stand your ground laws?
Do I oppose? I am not a fan of stand your ground laws.
If someone breaks into my home, I have a right the moment you break into my home to defend.
Well, okay. So listen, I agree with you. You're right in that instance to defend yourself. Now, I think the numbers, and that's a whole other conversation. Let's not even go there today. We can do another show on it, about defensive uses of weapons is completely a bullshit number.
There are
However,
problems.
do I think you have your right to defend your home? I do. So there is just an instance of stand your ground laws being applied in Florida. Okay, just over the past week, a trial that was going to happen. I was away. I don't know the outcome.
Yeah.
Where a woman parked her car in one spot and sent somebody, and I think two other people, to hold two other spots in a really busy parking lot. And someone else was trying to park in this unoccupied spot while there was people waiting in the spot. And the person who wanted to park there was arguing with the person standing in the spot. The person who had already parked her car walked over and pulled a gun and got arrested. And she was claiming stand your ground. Okay. Now, nobody got killed. Okay. But what happens is stand your ground has come to mean far more than I get to defend my home. Someone gets into, listen, you and I get pissed off at each other. What happened in the old days? We'd push each other around and it's over. People get mad at each other now and they pull out a gun, okay? And they claim stand your ground, and there's too many instances. So you know what?
Okay, it can be abused. You agree in principle with stand your ground.
The way the current laws are written and applied, I disagree with them, okay? But here's maybe where we can agree. If there's a way to acknowledge the right to self-defense, okay, in a way where it also prevents the abuse so that someone has the right to defend themselves, but we can also reduce the instances of gun violence that result from just petty bullshit, maybe you and I would agree on a way to do that.
Yeah, I agree with you, Fred. I don't know how you do that.
But yeah, you asked me, do I agree with the way stand your ground laws are currently written, used, and applied? And I do.
You agree with basic self-defense and stand your ground?
Do I agree with the way stand your ground laws are currently written, used, and applied? I don't. I think there's a problem. I think there's a problem. That doesn't mean I don't think you have a right to defend yourself, but I think there's a problem with those current laws.
Because you do believe that I and you have an inherent right.
I've never argued.
I know you haven't.
I'm not an anti. Listen, I know what guns did to my family. I wish they didn't exist. I really do. I wish we went back to the old days where I could punch you in the nose and it was over. Okay? But I also get the reality of where we are today. And man, I do want to punch you in the nose just sometimes. But that's all I would ever want to do. Okay? But so I wish they didn't exist because I think they have become an option for people who far too often would have just walked away from something. Okay,
and you're right. And look, Fred, I'm part of it.
But I'm not against guns. I'm not against gun owners. I hate gun violence.
Agreed, and I respect that, and I'm glad you said that, and people need to hear that because I have way too many people, Fred, who when I interact with you on the right, still say, "Fucking Joe, why are you talking to him? He's a gun grabber." And then
those same people send me emails threatening me and saying horrific things, and it's like, you know what? They're just a bunch of losers.
But agreed. But what do you? You would like to see certain. All right, you would like to see certain guns banned. I think where you and I could come together a lot is on doing a hell of a lot more before a gun is bought to make sure a bad, evil, sick guy doesn't get a gun.
You know what I would love to see?
What?
Because I know we disagree on how to handle AR-15s, assault rifles. People will argue over what an assault rifle is.
Every gun can be an assault.
I know. So let's not go there. Let's do this. You know what I would love to see? I'd love to see, and I'll bet you only people from my side would go for this, because I'd love to see primetime congressional hearings on this issue where you bring all the experts, do it over a day, over days, whatever. Okay, you bring everyone together to talk about, and that means CEOs from the gun companies, bring someone from the NRA, bring people from the medical community, because let's talk about how this is a public health issue. Bring people from the gun violence prevention community and let everyone talk about their position and why. And let the gun manufacturers have to explain how we went from 1% to 25% and what could have been done and what we still can do to ensure more safety going forward. Put it all out in the open for American
gun owners. Put gun owners. Put AR-15 owners out there. Put them on the panel.
Put them all. Let's have this big public open conversation and figure it out.
I'm completely with you. Fred, completely. We haven't, as a fucking country, we haven't had that honest, uncomfortable conversation about guns. We haven't had it. You and I do this regularly. We're on opposite sides and we do this. You're right. This is not being done in prime time for all eyeballs to see, because this issue is ripping us, just ripping us. And more people on my side are going to keep buying more and more guns because of it.
But you know what? Let's pull the scab off. Let's do it in this big open way, so that just maybe there's a solution. Everyone won't agree, because there's always going to be unhappy people. But you know what? Let's find a way to deal with the reality of what we currently have in America and to ensure safety. Okay? Because whether it's through legislation or technology or law enforcement or money, whatever it is, let's find a way to save lives that will work.
If I asked you for a dream list of one or two things, if you could get when it comes to reform, what would you pick? If you could
Well, I think you and I have talked about the number one on my list before, and we disagree on it. I would repeal PLCA. And the reason is, I think we need to get to the bottom of that spike from 1.2% of sales to over 25% of sales, when the market for those weapons in the sport and hunting communities actually declined, because that's what they said those guns were for. But the market, Americans hunted less over the past, 23 years. Okay. The sport market for these has actually declined across America. So how did we go from 1% of sales to 25% of sales? I want to repeal PLCA because I want to understand that jump. I want to understand the decisions on marketing, and I want to understand the choices and decisions that led to doing nothing to ensure safety when that spike happened.
They marketed a legal product. And as long as the product is legal, they're going to market it as best they can. And look,
they made intentional decisions to market them, okay, to children in ways that without getting into details, okay, I can show exactly how the person who killed my daughter was influenced by it.
I respect that, and I hear that. 2/3 of the AR-15 gun owners in this country are like white men, 45 and above.
So. By the way,
it's become much bigger than just a sporting firearm.
They marketed a legal product, but I'm going to argue that it was more than the ban ending in 2004. I will argue, and this is part of what I want to know, that the bigger thing happened in 2007. And it was the Heller decision that used the phrase common use, which, by the way, everyone on your side now says, we can't do anything about these weapons. They're in common use. The most popular, rifle in America, blah, blah, blah. Except it wasn't. It happened after 2007. And I'm going to make an argument, okay, that after the common use language, they went on a business strategy, okay, to over-manufacture. You see it in the numbers. The numbers don't lie. You can see the spike. To over-manufacture and flood the streets. And the only way to do it, okay, was to market them far beyond the intended use and purpose of what they said the weapons were for. And in doing so, okay, they without ever an acknowledgement or a commitment to ensuring safety. Okay, I want to know what happened in those boardrooms when those business decisions were made. And I want them under oath.
And I would be open to you exploring that, but you take the consumer out of the equation, my friend. Look, this has become the AR-15 and all of its hybrids have become the most popular semi-automatic long gun. But the consumer's making this decision as well for a lot of reasons. When you talk to AR-15 owners, it is a great self-defense, home defense firearm. That's primarily, Fred, when you talk to
that's
AR-15.
Bullshit. The numbers, again, the numbers don't lie. The instances of home defense with an AR-15
Fred,
do not explain Do you know? Hang on. Do you know the percentage of families in America?
Such a jerk. You are
The
such a
percentage
jerk.
of families in America that actually own guns has declined over the same time period.
Agreed. I
Okay.
know.
So these weapons are being stockpiled by a smaller percentage of Americans. Okay.
It's a growing percentage.
And they are ending up in places where they don't belong. Okay. No, sorry, Joe. There's a much bigger thing going on here.
But Fred, my friend, when you actually talk to the owners, when you poll the owners of AR-15s, they tell
the minority of Americans who own them. Yes.
Well, whatever. You're talking about a gun. There are 25 some million of them out there. When you talk to people who own them, why do you have these? Why do they use these? They tell you. Now, you can discount that information, but they tell you why they use them. And the principal reason people have them and use them is home defense, self-defense, sporting, and targeting practice. Those are the main reasons. And there's a reason why it's a really popular firearm. There's a reason why law enforcement loves it. They're easy to use. They're lightweight. Fred,
we're not talking about law. We're not talking about law enforcement because I have no issue with law enforcement owning what they need to do to ensure the safety of our streets. In fact, I will argue that I am a bigger proponent of law enforcement and their safety by wanting to reduce gun violence and wanting to do something about this than those on the other side.
The only point I was making, I agree. The only point I was making is the same reason that law enforcement likes these firearms is because they are accurate, lightweight, easy to use. They're effective. That's the same reason why the AR-15 owners out in the private world are.
And you know what law enforcement doesn't like is knowing how many of those are now on our streets. By the way, being carried by people who also go into the intention of a shooting event wearing body armor. Yep. Okay. And trust me, I talk to law enforcement too.
I know you do. But again, the stats do matter, Fred. The firearm of choice in most mass shootings is still, not the AR-15. Handguns still kill, 80, 90% of the people in this country. And even in most mass shootings, the AR-15 is not the weapon of choice. We focus on and last thing I'll say, Fred, there are a gazillion hybrids of whatever you want to call the AR-15.
When you look at these random shooting events, again, a mass shooting is defined as 4 or more, okay? Mm-hmm. And yes, and the majority of because there's a lot of them. We have 40,000 people here who died, okay? But when you look at the mass shootings where someone now walks into a building with the intention of killing as many as possible, they're usually walking in with at least one AR-15 and a lot of ammunition. Okay, and if you look at the instances of the schools or the Walmarts or the movie theaters or the hotel in Las Vegas, I'm blanking on the name.
Yeah.
There's a reason why the weapon is being chosen, and I'm sorry,
but it's not. You would acknowledge, Fred, it's not the most chosen gun of choice, even in mass
not
shootings.
Without going and looking at data for the past year or two. I will not acknowledge that over a longer period of time. But I have to look back over the past few years. I don't know if that's accurate or not. So, but I will say this. Okay, 1% to 25% of a market that was shrinking. Okay. The reality is the manufacturers and the lobby, okay, took advantage of a market through what I would absolutely call illicit marketing schemes to market these weapons to people who never should have had them. And the results have been deadly. I visit my daughter in a cemetery because of it.
You'd ban AR-15s if you could, correct?
If I could, yeah. But listen, I also, and we've talked about this before, I wish I could. I also recognize where we are as a country. And so it's why I also want to pursue every other measure to mitigate, like background checks on ammunition. It's why I want to, figure out a way for us as a country to come together to acknowledge here's where we are, but here's what we can do to save lives. That's why I want to put this out as a primetime congressional hearing.
My side will never do it.
I know that.
Yeah, my
which
side will never do
should
it.
tell you a whole lot in and of itself.
Well, yes. But I've got no love lost.
Yes. An absolutely emphatic
I've got no fucking love lost for the NRA and the lobbying groups on my, because they don't even like this. They don't want to give you an inch. They don't want to talk to somebody like you, and they don't want to. I get all of that. But background checks and red flag laws, reforms like this, we can still.
Had Nashville had a red flag law in place, there's a really good chance that shooting doesn't happen this past week.
I agree. Or it should have come up even if they didn't have a red flag law. I'm forgetting the federal state law. She should have been denied that if they had known that she was undergoing mental health issues.
Know. The parents.
The background check, though, should have showed it.
They did know. Okay. And law enforcement knew. They didn't have a mechanism to do anything about it.
Fred.
It's even worse. Governor Bill Lee, that really miserable human being, okay, actually rejected the money from the Safer Communities Act intended for the sole purpose of implementing a red flag law system. He rejected the money to avoid doing it. And honestly, because of that decision, you can put blame for this now on him.
Oh, I don't, Fred. I don't know if that's fair.
All those who are all in on doing nothing to save lives in order to keep guys like me, okay?
Look, you and I have a mutual buddy. We differ politically. He and I do. Eric Swalwell. He's a good friend of yours.
Yep.
But Fred, when he tweets shit like, you're either on the side of the kids or you're on the side of guns, that's not helpful. And by the way, that's not accurate. I'm a two-way defender. I don't want to see kids killed. That kind of shit doesn't help.
If he added one word to that sentence, I'd be all in on it.
What?
You're either on the side of kids or you're on the side of the gun lobby. The NRA, the day of the Nashville shooting, was tweeting out shit, okay? Basically saying the opposite of that, okay? So the gun lobby... I could go along
with that.
What's that?
I could go along with that.
So listen, I'm not going to make this, and you're either a gun guy or an anti-gun guy. I never have with you, and I never will. But I'm against the lobby and those who they have paid to elect, who now serve them over serving the needs to protect our children. I am against that, okay? And I am against the lobby that has put us in this place where any conversation, like the one we're having, about doing anything to save lives is bad for them. They've turned my daughter's life into nothing but a cost of doing business. And I'll never get over that.
And I concur. I'm against the gun lobby and left the gun lobby a number of years ago. I agree with you. I think there are a lot of gun owners who want nothing to do with the NRA. And I think gun owners, Fred, you and I have talked about it, got to be fucking pulled into this debate and sit at a table if you want to get something done. If this is just seen as something coming from the left, because there is an element, Fred, not you, but there are people on the left who do want to take guns, who do want to confiscate, who do want to ban, who do want to change or do something about the Second Amendment. That's there, and they talk about it, not you, but that element is there. As long as any kind of reform is coming from that place, gun owners are just going to shut down.
But you know what? Gun owners are in this conversation, and the majority, you're in this conversation. Joe Scarborough is in this conversation. You're both gun owners. Gun owners are in it. And the majority of Americans, which includes gun owners, agree with so much of what you and I think should be done.
Agreed.
The issue isn't getting gun owners into it. The issue is what to do about that minority in government who refuses to even have the conversation. who refuses to engage, who refuses to potentially accept we can take reasonable steps like red flag laws.
Well, like red flag laws, but like every kind of gun law, Fred, you got to be careful with red flag laws because red flag laws can be don't. We're talking about constitutional due process. I support red flag laws, but man, we got to be careful with them. And I'd argue with you on this, Fred. No, gun owners are not at the fucking table. Yeah, Joe Scarborough and Joe Walsh, and maybe there are a few isolated gun owners. Gun owners need to be organized.
That's such a load of shit. They're not at the table because you're choosing not to be.
Agreed.
Okay, but again, across the country they're at the table. In Congress they're not because they won't. Okay, so that is a load of shit.
No. And the reason you've got those guys in Congress, Fred, who are resistant, because the only gun owners group they hear from is the NRA. I'm saying there needs to be another gun owner lobbying group out there now running the NRA out of business who will say, I'm open to some reforms.
Listen,
Let's look.
You and I have another mutual friend, and he's trying to do that. Matt Littman, 97%. Okay,
it's got to be done.
Okay, he's trying, but you know what? The reality is, there's a lot of organization of gun owners across the country. The issue is what's happening in Congress right now. Okay, the issue is what's happening with certain governors. Because while you say red flag laws can be abused, let's look at Florida. They've been used over 9,000 times. You don't see anyone across Florida saying they
implemented right after your shooting.
Yes. And by the way, do you want to know who the number one user of red flag laws is in the state of Florida? The most conservative sheriff that exists here, Sheriff Grady Judd in Polk County. Okay? So, because it's a tool to remove weapons. It's a tool. And there's a due process component, and they're working. What's going to be abused, what's going to lead to more dead people in my state is permitless carry. And honestly, I will do anything to save lives. That's where I stand. That is my position. And permitless carry is going to be bad for the state. Those pricks, you want to know what they did as part of the permitless carry bill? Because technically you're prohibited from walking onto a school campus with a firearm. But they lowered the penalty from a felony to a misdemeanor, okay, as part of this permitless carry bill. Okay, they are almost inviting more gun violence onto school campuses. That's who they are. And I'm sorry, I'm not okay with it.
I don't know that this is breaking news, but I'm a rabid gun rights dude, and I think Fred and I have privately spoken about this. I have a problem with somebody. I have a problem with permitless carry. I have a problem with somebody buying a gun, passing a background check, but without any training to use that gun. I don't have a problem with concealed carry, Fred. I don't have a problem with open carry. To me, you got a right to carry. Well, hold on. But if you want to carry a gun outside the home, I got a problem with you not undergoing basic training, which is my beef with permitless carry. You and I agree on that.
No, 100%. That's why I've called it from the start untrained carry. I agree with you 100%. And let's not get into the whole thing on open because we are going to completely disagree on that. Save that for another podcast.
Yeah. But no, and Fred, that is, look, Texas did it. Florida is doing it, right? Florida is
doing
passing
what? Permitless?
Passing permitless.
It's just waiting on the governor's signature. And what they did is they changed the rules of debate because they didn't want to be called out. They with their supermajority, they basically only allowed witnesses to come on for 1 minute or less. So you never had a chance to really debate it. People aren't paying any attention to what's happening in Tallahassee now. These bills are just going through under the supermajority because there's nothing exciting happening in the hearings because they've controlled the hearings with the supermajority, and it's just a bunch of bullshit now. But all sorts of terrible things are happening right now in the state because of it. Permitless carry is just one of them.
I just think, Fred, that when people on your side focus on going after and making things more difficult for law-abiding gun owners, you're going to run into a wall. When you talk about bans or anything like that, you're going to run against a wall.
Yeah, I've heard that now for a lot of years. My daughter is dead because we've done nothing. So
I'm just saying I didn't mean to say it like that. I just don't think you're going to advance that ball. I don't think you should.
Listen, I'm not sure.
I don't want you, hey Fred. I don't want you to stop going after whatever you want to go after, my friend.
I hear you, but I wouldn't agree with that.
Focus on doing what you can before a gun is bought.
Listen,
make it harder.
All rights have restrictions, and I agree on focusing on what you can do before a gun is bought. Your lobby has fought that as well.
Agreed.
And it's because of that we are where we are. And now, because of where we are, we need to figure out everything we can do to reduce the gun violence death rate, reduce the instances of gun violence, and reduce the severity of gun violence injuries when it happens.
You would acknowledge, though, to everybody who follows you and believes in you, that we are not getting rid of the 400 some million guns.
No,
we're not getting rid of guns. I know that, but even like it's not a realistic expectation to think we can do anything about that number.
Listen, absolutely, unfortunately, in my mind, no, because I think many of those weapons are in the hands of people who are a concern to me. Not all of them. Don't have all your people start screaming at me.
Not most of them, right? Most gun owners.
Not even most of them. Although I am concerned about the concentration of the vast majority of these weapons in a smaller group of people, which is happening across the country right now. Because there is that's happening, and it is a little concerning. But that said,
though, Fred, acknowledge gun ownership is up among women. It's up among black women. It's up among black men. It's up among Asians. We're not just talking about crazy white dudes buying.
No, we're definitely not.
We're
definitely not. Okay, and the total numbers of ownership is up. You're right, because those populations have grown dramatically. Okay, but as a percentage, okay, that's not necessarily an accurate statement. I have to go look at the numbers.
And there are concerns. They have concerns about their safety.
They
want to be able to defend themselves.
100%.
Fred, you'd acknowledge, and everybody need, the vast majority of homicides in this country are committed with handguns. Handguns are still the weapon of choice.
In a home.
When it comes to gun violence.
In a home where a gun is legally owned. That is correct.
Well, you lost me there. You go to the South Side Chicago or St. Louis. I mean, bad guys, thugs, gang members, bad people anywhere in this country generally use handguns to kill other people.
Listen, you're 100% right. But when you look, you mentioned, and maybe I got a little off course. You mentioned women, for example.
Yeah.
Okay. When you look at these guns being bought and stored in homes, okay, the numbers of people who are being killed with the gun that is legally owned by themselves or someone they reside with are going up dramatically. You talk about Chicago, all you guys love to talk about Chicago. It gets to the whole point of everything we're discussing, because Indiana is literally right next door, okay? And Chicago has taken steps to try and reduce gun violence. And I believe actually, I'm not going to cite statistics I can't be sure of. But Indiana is right next door, okay? But there isn't just Chicago. Let's talk about Texas. Let's talk about how well the loosening of all the restrictions there is working. Let's talk about all the new gun laws in Texas and the spike in gun violence across Texas. It's a real thing.
It's a real thing, Fred. But the thing you're always up against is in places like Chicago and other urban environments around this country where gun laws are tough, gun usage and homicide rates are still up as well in red and blue, urban and rural.
100%. But it's and gun laws are tough. You're right.
And
But
don't tell
guns-
me, and don't
No, no,
give me the whole Indiana thing, my friend.
New Jersey and Pennsylvania, they actually track and trace where the guns come from that are used in crimes, okay, in these places. And something along the lines of north of 75% come from out of state, okay? That's a fact. So, yes, we can talk about it, and there are environmental factors, and we need to deal with the realities of what influences gun violence in these urban areas. But the rural areas are no less deadly, and in fact, in many of these cases, it's where the guns are coming from.
Thank you, my friend. You always make me feel a bit more engaged, not a bit more engaged. Whenever you and I talk about this, I'm frustrated. You and I are both frustrated. I'm frustrated on this issue, probably for a different reason. And nobody can match your frustration because of what you've lived through, because of your gorgeous daughter. But we got to do something. And you nailed it, Fred. The two sides don't fucking talk. We ought to come together on this issue.
Well, listen, I hope we do, because lives depend on it. It's why I value the friendship that you and I have, because it all is the result of two guys trying to talk.
Two dads.
And I will value this more than you'll ever know.
Fred Guttenberg. Hey, plug it. The book is called
American Carnage, available for pre-order now, coming out May 2nd. We're going to take on the myths of the gun lobby.
It's not some left-wing screed. What is it?
And it's a book you're going to want to read. The truth is coming.
American Carnage, out in May. Fred, I can't wait to read it, because it'll probably piss me off. But that's
all right.
That's good for me. Love you, brother.
Love you back.
Thank you for listening. Remember to listen, share, and follow White Flag with Joe Walsh on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere great podcasts are found. And be sure to leave a 5-star review. This has been White Flag with Joe Walsh.